Hi girls! Hope everybody had a great day today. Hope everything is going well. You guys ready to start part 2 of The Ordinary Princess? Let's get going here. Long sunny years drifted by in the kingdom of Phantasmagoria. And with every passing year, the old fairy Crustacea's gift became more and more noticeable as the seventh princess became more and more ordinary. No one ever called her by her grand name now. From the townsfolk to in the city down to the smallest page at the palace, she was always known simply as the ordinary princess. While even her own family never called her Amethyst, they called her Amy. And what could be more ordinary than that? After the day of her christening, she had begun to change from a beautiful baby princess into just an ordinary baby. Her soft golden curls stopped curling and became darker, and her blue eyes turned a grayish-brown neither here nor there color. And as she grew older, her little nose turned up and her hair hung down straighter and straighter, and not all the curl papers in the world could make it look like a proper princess's should. Her 6 lovely sisters, with their rose-petal complexions, their straight white little noses, rippling gold hair, and perfect deportment, were a delight to see. But Amy, oh dear, how ordinary she was. Her mamma, the queen, was a very determined woman who would not give up hope that something could be done to correct the distressing ordinariness of her own youngest daughter. She hired dance masters from Spain to teach her elegance and deportment, and hairdressers and beauty experts from France to improve her hair and complexion, but all to no avail. Even the court magician was of no use. His card, which he always carried on him, had printed in one corner, "All kinds of charms on application, vanishing done." But none of his charms made any difference to the ordinariness of the ordinary princess, and in spite of his best efforts, not one single freckle ever vanished off the Princess Amy's little snub nose. She grew up as gawky as possible, with a distressing habit of standing with her feet apart and her hands behind her back, and a hair of a color that not even a court poet could describe as anything but just plain mousy brown. But though she proved every day how strong the old fairy Crustacea's magic had been, her other christening gifts were not entirely wasted. True, the splendid jewels and brocades of the kings and princes and barons were quite out of place on her homely little person, but the fairy gifts had been very useful. For though she was ordinary, she did possess health, wit, courage, charm, and cheerfulness. But because she was not beautiful, no one ever seemed to notice these other qualities, which is so often the way of the world. Not that it ever worried the ordinary princess. She sometimes was a little bit sorry that she was such a disappointment to her mamma the queen. But after all, said the ordinary princess, Mamma has 6 perfectly scrumptious daughters, so I don't think one not so goodish ought to matter that very much. There were also very times when, being a very ordinary sort of person, she felt a little envious of her sister's beauty. But oh, what fun they miss by not being me, said Princess Amy, as she leaned her elbows on the windowsill of her room and looked over the forest. They have to keep their complexions white and play the harp and embroider tapestry, and the only game they ever play is throwing each other a golden ball. Oh, but I do such exciting things, said the ordinary princess, and she smiled a little secret smile to herself as she leaned forward out of the window to sniff the breeze from the forest. Her room was in one of the turrets of the palace at the wall, a big round room with tall pointed windows on 3 sides of it, so that from one window she could see the sunrise and from the other the sunset. It was the same room in which she had lain as a baby in her golden cradle and blinked at the painted ceilings. Amethyst-colored tapestries still covered the walls, and outside the window grew a great wisteria hung with pale purple blossoms. The wisteria had a strong gray stem that climbed and clung to the old weather-beaten stones of the turret, and the ordinary princess smiled again as she leaned out and touched the rough, knobby stem with her little brown hand. So here is a picture of all of the 6 beautiful princesses, all of Amy's sisters. She shared a particular secret with the old Wisteria that nobody in the palace ever suspected, not even Nurse Marta. Since the time when she was 3 years old, she had longed to escape from the palace gardens and play in the forest, the great, beautiful, mysterious forest of far away, that swept right up to the very walls of the palace. From her window she could watch the rabbits frolicking among the ferns and the moss, and the shy deer picking their way through the leafy aisles among the tree trunks. Then, one summer evening, when she had been put to bed, when it was still light outside, she had a great idea, a wonderful idea. It was so wonderful that she could not wait to carry it out, and the very next minute she was climbing down the turret window and down the twisty curves of the old wisteria, and had run off into the forest to play. Since that first time, when she was a little more than 6 years old, she had done it many, many times. The old wisteria became a ladder into her secret world, and almost every day, rain or shine, she would scramble down the turret wall and be off into the forest, leaving her crown behind and tucking up her trailing dresses and making believe that she was a peasant girl or a woodcutter's daughter, living alone in the greenwood. The forest far away is surely the most beautiful place in the world. Between the great tree trunks, the ground is carpeted with a deep emerald moss, all starry with flowers. Countless wild birds build their nests up there, and the moonlit nights in the spring it is full of the song of many nightingales. No fierce animals ever roam there, but only the dappled deer, the frolicking rabbits, and the little gentle woodland creatures. And sometimes in the spring you would think that the sky must have fallen into the forest, for thousands upon thousands of bluebells spread their sapphire carpet through the glades. When March winds blow coldly over the city, inside the forest it is warm and still, and on the hot summer days the forest glades are cool and green. Even on wintry or wet days, it seemed beautiful to the ordinary princess. So while her 6 beautiful sisters played their golden ball in the palace gardens, she played with the rabbits and the deer in the forest. The 6 proper princesses never went out of doors without pages to carry silken canopies over their heads, for fear the sunshine might spoil their complexions. The ordinary princess pushed her crown under her royal night-dress case and never wore a hat, and her nose got frecklier and frecklier in spite of all the queen's lily lotions and lemon juice. And here's a little picture of Amy playing in the forest. The 6 lovely princesses had ladies-in-waitings and pages standing around when they played ball, and to pick it up when they dropped it. But the ordinary princess learned to climb trees like a squirrel and swim like an otter in the deep forest pools. Oh, she had a lovely time. Nobody could understand why she grew so brown, or why her brocaded gowns were always getting torn and her embroidered shoes so stained and scratched. But then no one ever much worried about her anyway, and whenever anybody remembered to ask where she was, the answer was nearly always, oh, somewhere about, for to tell the truth, they were all really quite glad that she should keep out of the way, as such a very ordinary child was a disgrace to any royal family. So it is not surprising that sometimes the courtiers forgot that there was a 7th princess after all. One by one, the 6 beautiful sisters grew up and married handsome and gallant princes, and 6 years running the ordinary princess followed one of her sisters down the long, dim aisle of the great cathedral of Banff, and helped to carry the bride's train and threw rice and rose petals after the glass coach as the bride and her groom drove away from the palace. The 6th year she had to carry the train all by herself, for all her other sisters were married, so there was only herself to follow the Princess Pearl up the aisle when Pearl married the Crown Prince of Crystalvia. The bride's train was of silver tissue embroidered with pearls, and it was 10 yards long, and the ordinary princess found it exceedingly heavy and very difficult to manage. It was a hot day, and the cathedral was rather stuffy. What with the huge crowd of wedding guests, the cloud of incense from the swinging silver censers, the thousands of lighted candles, and the heavy scent of lilies and white roses. The Princess Pearl looked lovelier than ever, and the Crown Prince of Kristalia very handsome and gallant, though privately the ordinary princess thought him rather stiff. He may be very good-looking, she thought, but I am quite sure he has never giggled one giggle in his life. Her bridesmaid dress was made of amethyst satin embroidered with silver and sewn with a great many pearls in honor of her sister. The silver embroidery scratched her neck and her arms, and her crown was rather tight, and as well as being too heavy. And altogether she was very glad when the ceremony was over. The last slice of wedding cake had been cut. The last handful of rose petals had been thrown at after the bride and groom's crystal coach. "Well, that's that," said the ordinary princess, tossing her crown on the bed and wriggling out of her amethyst satin bridesmaid dress. She fetched an apple from the top shelf of her bookshelf, where she kept a hidden store of them, and perched on the windowsill of her room in her petticoat. The evening sun was making the treetops of the forest all dusty gold, and there were great twittering among the birds. "I suppose next year it will be my turn to get married," thought the ordinary princess. "Oh dear, I'm sure I won't like it a bit. No more fun, no more forest, having to wear best dresses every day, crowns and court curtsies and state banquets and things like that. No climbing trees and a very handsome husband with no sense of humor." The ordinary princess sighed gloomily and threw her apple core at some rabbits. "Oh, your highness!" cried Nurse Marta in a startled voice, bustling into the room with a great rustling starched skirt. "Sitting at the window in your petticoat! Oh, whatever will you be doing next? Suppose someone were to see you!" She hustled the ordinary princess away, drew the curtains, and lit all the lamps. "Oh, but Marta, it's still daylight," said the ordinary princess wistfully. "And there's such a lovely sunset." "What has that got to do with it?" asked Nurse Marta. "It's past 7 o'clock, and that's quite time to draw the curtains." And she scolded the ordinary princess for leaving her beautiful bridesmaid flock on the floor. "Oh, your highness," said the older nurse, throwing her hands up in the air in horror. "When will you learn to behave like a princess?" Then she called the ladies-in-waiting and the maids, and they all chattered and laughed together like a flock of starlings as they brushed the ordinary princess's hair and poured scented water into her marble bathtub. "Now there is only one princess," said her ladies-in-waiting. "Soon there will be suitors coming for your highness, and next year there will be another wedding." Oh, but the ordinary princess only yawned. She wished they would not talk so much, for it had been a very long and tiring day, and she had a headache. Besides, she was not very interested in weddings. She had been a bridesmaid at 6 of them, and by now it all seemed a little dull. But very soon it looked as if there was not going to be a 7th wedding after all. The king became flustered and peppery, and the queen became more and more anxious and distracted as time went on. The prime minister and the Lord High Chamberlain and all the counselors of state went about with such long faces that the ordinary princess said it was a wonder they did not trip over their chins. It was not that there were any lack of suitors. The fame of the princesses of Phantasmagoria had gone abroad, and each year princes and peers had come from all over the wide world to make offers of marriage. They were quite as many as, if not more than, the number who had paid visits at the ceremony at the Palace of Vamp in the year before the wedding of the Princess Pearl. For was there not one more princess left? And didn't everyone know that the youngest princesses are always the most beautiful and charming of all? The court of Vamp, you see, had always been a little bit discreetly silent on the subject of his 7th princess, and outside the kingdom it was naturally supposed that the Princess Amethyst was as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than any of her 6 lovely suitors. And so, of course, the list of visiting suitors was impressive as ever. One after another, as the months rolled by, princes and grand dukes and royal highnesses and serene transparencies of every description, shape, and size arrived at the palace of Fanf to pay a friendly visit, but in reality to meet Her Serene and Royal Highness, the Princess Amethyst, Alexandra, Augusta, Araminta, Adelaide, Aurelia Anne of Phantasmarania. But none of them ever stayed more than one day. One after another, after their first shocked look at the ordinary princess, they hurriedly remembered previous engagements. Well, they apologized for having to make such a brief stay, and said that if they should ever happen to be passing that way again, they would of course drop in. After that, they would pack their luggage and hurry away the very next morning. None of them ever stayed a second day, except His Serene Transparency, the Archduke of Pantecholonia, who was in such a hurry to leave that he tripped over his ermine-trimmed cloth on the top stair of the grand staircase and fell down the whole flight, after which, of course, he was so bruised that he had to be put to bed for a week until it was safe for him to travel. So the year went round and the winter passed and it was spring once more. And once again it seemed to the ordinary princess as though the sky had fallen into the forest afar away, as she lay on her back in the sea of bluebells and watched a pair of orioles building their nest in the branches overhead. As she lay there, she sang a little nursery rhyme that her ladies-in-waiting would sing to her when she was a little girl. It is a very old song now, but then it was almost new. Lavender's blue, rosemary's green. When you are king, I shall be queen. No one listening to her would have realized from her light-hearted singing what a very great deal of trouble she was causing. For while the ordinary princess lay on her back and sang songs among the bluebells, her father the king was attending an extra special important meeting of the Council of State, summoned to discuss the question of the marriage of his last and youngest unmarried daughter. "Something must be done," shouted the king, and he banged the table so hard that he twisted his thumb and spilt the inkpot onto the Lord High Chamberlain's velvet robe, which did not improve matters. "It was all your fault in the first place," said the king, getting crosser than ever and finding some difficulty in keeping his crown from sliding over one ear, a thing that always seemed to happen whenever he got the least excited. "Years ago, I sat in this very same room," said the king, sucking his injured thumb, "and warned the lot of you. I warned you that you were being rash, and don't interrupt me, Rhodesia," he added fiercely, turning on the queen, who had moaned at the sound by now of that all too familiar word. But the queen was far too upset to interrupt anyone. She asked for a glass of water and some smelling salts and fanned herself with her lace handkerchief. Well, hasn't anyone got anything to say?" said the king. "Has no one had any ideas?" The council maintained a gloomy silence, and the queen took a sip of water in a faint voice. "Oh, we must do something. The disgrace of it! There's never been a spinster in all the annals of Phannerisms." The prime minister coughed apologetically. Well, your majesty," said the prime minister, "there hasn't ever been a princess in the family quite like, He caught the king's eyes and subsided. "I asked for ideas," said the king tartly, "not criticism. What I want from all of you is a lot less criticism and more ideas. Her Majesty is right. No princess of our house has ever failed to make a brilliant marriage. And," added the king, looking more fiercely than ever, "we are not going to start now." He raised his fist to thump on the table, thought better of it, and glowered at his counselors instead. There was a lot more silence. "Well?" demanded the king again. Well? "If I may make a suggestion, your majesty," said the Lord High Chamberlain nervously, "could we not try the effect of a dragon?" "On whom?" inquired the king, puzzled. On the suitors, your majesty. It has sometimes proved very useful in the case of, not very attractive damsels," he finished hurriedly. "Explain yourself," ordered the king sternly. "Well, your majesty knows what romantic minds these young princes have, so suppose we hired a dragon to lay waste the countryside," We might then imprison Her Royal Highness in the tower and send out a proclamation to say that any prince who slew the dragon should be rewarded by the princess's hand in marriage." "I venture to think, your majesty," said the Lord High Chamberlain, being more nervous than ever, "that this might have the desired effect, provided, of course, that Her Highness was kept out of sight, as it were," finished the Lord High Chamberlain rapidly. "Oh, how can you say such a thing? Oh, my poor child!" wailed the queen, taking a long sniff of her smelling salts. But the king suddenly sat up straight with a wild look in his eye. "I believe there's something to it," said the king. The council brightened visibly, and the Lord High Chamberlain tried hard to look modest. "To think," said the king, "after all these years, one of my counselors should actually have a good idea. You," said the king, pointing at the prime minister, "you will see to it at once that a special committee is formed to carry out such a project. We will require a minister in charge of hiring a suitable dragon and a subcommittee for drawing up a draft of a suitably worded proclamation. And you, my dear," said the king, turning to his queen, "will please see it that Amy retires to a secluded tower and remains there, out of sight, until this affair reaches a happy conclusion." The king rubbed his hands together and beamed cheerfully at the relieved council. "Oh, a capital scheme! I've yet to hear of a prince who could resist the chance of killing a dragon. Oh, some silly young nitwit is sure to come charging up here to slay the creature, and then," said the king, "we'll have him. He simply can't turn down the girl after that, and anyway, he won't see her until it's too late." "But what about Rhubarbury?" inquired the queen at this point. "Eh?" said the king. "Her Majesty means the Royal Highness the Grand Duke Reginald of Rhubarbury," put in the Prime Minister helpfully. "Perhaps your Majesty forgets that His Highness arrives this afternoon for the express purpose of seeing Her Highness the Princess with a view to matrimony," said the king. "We know perfectly well what will happen as soon as he lays eyes on her." He scratched his chin and looked thoughtful. "I suppose," said the king hopefully, "we couldn't say that she had a chill and see if he'd make an offer for her hand without seeing her." "I fear, sire, that such a ruse would only cause His Highness to prolong his visit until he did see her," said the Prime Minister. "Oh, perhaps you're right," said the king. "Well, as we can't possibly produce any dragons by this afternoon, we better give Amy one more chance of getting off without one. And if the Grand Duke remembers a previous appointment after seeing her, then we'll just try this dragon scheme of yours. Come, my dear." And straightening his crown, the king went merrily off to take a stroll in the kitchen gardens. He was a man of simple tastes, and his hobby was growing onions. That evening, before the banquet for His Royal Highness the Grand Duke Reginald of Rhubarbury, the queen paid a visit to the apartments of her youngest daughter. "Now, please pay attention, Amy," said the queen, sitting down on the edge of the ordinary princess' golden bed, "because this is very important. I particularly wish for you to make a grand impression on the Grand Duke, for if he should take a fancy to you, it will save your papa and myself a great deal of trouble and expense," added the queen, thinking of the high cost of hiring dragons. "Yes, mamma," said the ordinary princess. "So you will put down your most becoming dress and your prettiest crown." "Yes, mamma." "And for goodness sake, child, don't stand like that. Read together, and please remember to stand up straight and answer nicely when you're spoken to, and look and see if you are enjoying yourself." "Yes, mamma." "Do please try to remember to keep your back to the light as much as possible. I have heard," said the queen hopefully, "that His Highness is always a little short-sighted, and I can only trust that it is so. Always bear in mind that you are a princess of the royal house of Fanfaria, and if you are not very beautiful, just try to look as though you were." With which puzzling remark, Her Majesty the Queen departed. But alas, in spite of all of her good advice, the evening was a failure from the start. His Royal Highness the Grand Duke of Rhubarbury was not only pudgy and pompous, but full of pride, and the ordinary princess took an immediate dislike to him from the moment he entered the room. All of her royal mamma's eyebrow signals and all of her royal papa's whispers of "Amy, behave!" could not make her be more than stiffly polite to him. While, as for the Grand Duke, all the best dresses and becoming crowns and short-sightedness in the world could not describe him from the excessive ordinariness of the ordinary princess. "Good gracious," said the Grand Duke in a very loud whisper. "I don't believe the girl's a princess at all. Who ever heard of a princess with her hair that color and her nose, Count Poloff? Have you noticed her nose? Freckles, positively freckles. Shocking!" So the banquet was not a success, even though the Grand Duke Reginald ate a great deal and seemed, by the noise he made, to enjoy his food. The ordinary princess sat at his right hand, but she did not talk to him, firstly because she did not want to, and secondly because his mouth was always full, so it did not look like he could have answered her if she had. After this, no one was in the least surprised to hear, when the banquet was over, that the Grand Duke telling the king how sorry he was that he was not able to stay a second day, but he had just remembered a promise to made to visit the Baron Boris of Bigsbigwurg, and he was afraid he would have to leave immediately the next morning after breakfast. "I knew this was going to happen," said the Prime Minister glumly as he went off to look up the price of hiring dragons. A week went by, and then one day, when the ordinary princess was playing by herself in the forest, she met a party of girls from the city of Fanf who had come to the forest to picnic and gather bluebells. The ordinary princess had taken off her shoes and stockings and tucked her gown above her knees to keep it out of the damp moss, and no one would have suspected her of being a royal highness. The picnic party certainly did not, and she was a friendly sort of person, and in a few minutes they were all laughing and talking as though they'd known each other for years. They climbed trees and ran races and picked enough bluebells to fill every apron with flowers. But then when the sun began to sink behind the distant horizon, they said they must go home. "Oh, dear," said the nicest girl. Her name was Clorinda. "It's sad to think this is probably the last time for months we shall be able to come out here and pick flowers and enjoy ourselves." "Why do you say that?" said the ordinary princess. I'll show you a picture. Here is Amy and Clorinda talking together. "Why do you say that?" said the ordinary princess. She had hoped that they might come again, for they were nice, laughing, cheerful girls, and not a bit like the fine ladies of the court. "Oh, haven't you heard?" asked the one whose name was Belinda. "The Council of State is getting in a dragon to lay waste the countryside, and once the creature arrives, it won't be safe to go outside the city walls." "Whatever do you mean, getting in a dragon?" demanded the ordinary princess. "Do you mean on purpose? But whatever for?" "Oh, it's on purpose, all right," nodded Clorinda. "You must have come from some very out-of-the-way village if you hadn't heard. It's because of the princess, you know." "The princess?" "Yes. You see, nobody wants to marry her because she's not as pretty as princesses go." "But the dragon," insisted the ordinary princess. "Go on about the dragon. Why ever a dragon?" "Well, you see, it's this way," said Clorinda, plumping herself down on the moss and quite willing to explain. "The king and all of his counselors think that if they hire a dragon to lay waste the countryside and keep the princess shut up in the tower where no one can see her, they can send out a proclamation to say that whoever kills the dragon can marry her. Well, you know how princes are, just a lot of little boys when it comes to killing dragons. So, of course, some prince will get all heroic and kill the poor creature, and as soon as he does, he'll have to marry the princess, see?" "I see," said the ordinary princess. "It may be all right for the king," said Clorinda, "but I must say, I think it's bad luck on his kingdom." She got up off the moss and began filling her apron with bluebells that she had picked. "No more picnics," she said sadly, "and the dragon is sure to kill some poor neighbor's cow and sheep before it gets killed itself. I think it's a shame." "Yes," said the ordinary princess, "you're right, Clorinda. And it is a shame, and what's more, it ought to be stopped, and I know how to stop it." "What's that?" asked Clorinda, who had been busy with her flowers. "Nothing," said the ordinary princess. "I was only thinking out loud. I say, Clorinda, would you do something for me?" "Surely," said the Clorinda. "What is it?" "You're about my size. Will you swap your dress for mine?" Clorinda looked a bit doubtful. "Oh, come on," urged the ordinary princess, "just for fun." "Well," said Clorinda, "I suppose it's all right. But that's an awfully pretty dress you've got on, much nicer than mine." "Then it's settled," said the ordinary princess. "Come on, behind that tree trunk." A few minutes later, there came from behind the tree a princess in a plain homespun dress and print apron, and a girl in a trailing gown of amethyst-colored brocade. "Here are my shoes and stockings," said the ordinary princess, pulling them out of a hollow oak where she had hidden them. "I say, we do fit each other well, don't we?" "Oh, it's simply a lovely dress," sighed Clorinda, stroking the brocade folds. "I didn't realize it was such a grand one, the way you had it all bunched up. I've always wanted one like this. Are you sure you don't mind?" "Oh, of course not. I've always wanted one like this," said Amy. "You better run, Clorinda. Your friends have started." "Oh, goodness," said Clorinda. "I must fly. Goodbye." "Goodbye," called Amy. She stood at the edge of the forest and waved her hand until Clorinda was out of sight. Then she turned and looked at the walls and towers of the palace. "Dragons," said the ordinary princess. "I'll give them dragons. So they think they can push me off to old any silly prince who kills a dragon, do they?" And she stamped her foot and stuck out her tongue and at the palace walls just to relieve her feelings. "Well, you just wait and see." When she was safely back in her room, she took off Clorinda's dress and apron and Clorinda's buckled shoes and cotton stockings and hid them behind the amethyst-colored tapestries on the wall. Then she put on one of her own embroidered gowns and went demurely down to supper. After supper, she said she was tired and would go to bed early. But as soon as Nurse Marta and the ladies-in-waiting had gone, she got up again, lit one of the scented wax candles, and wrote a short letter. She propped the letter up in a conspicuous place on the mantel and dressed herself in Clorinda's clothes. And because it was rather cold, she took out her plainest cloak as well. Then she climbed out of the window for the last time. There was a full moon, and the forest looked all black and silver and mysterious in the moonlight. But it did not frighten the ordinary princess, because she knew it too well and was so fond of it. She stopped where the trees began to wave her hands at the turrets and the towers and the glistening walls of her home. Then, turning her back on it, she plunged into the forest and was gone. The next day, the uproar in the palace was beyond description. The flight of the Princess Amy had been discovered by two ladies-in-waiting whose duty it was to wake her every morning. But on that particular morning, they found there was no one to wake. The big golden four-poster bed with its amethyst satin draperies was not only empty, but it had obviously not been slept in, while the carved marble mantel stood a small white envelope, on which was written in large block capitals, "To whom it may concern." The ladies-in-waiting evidently thought it concerned them, or perhaps it was just their curiosity became too much for them. Anyway, they opened it at once, and when they read the letter inside, they both screamed at the top of their voices, and one of them fainted away. The one who didn't faint away called for help, and then ran as fast as she could to the queen. The king and queen were having breakfast together in the sun parlor when the lady-in-waiting burst in on them. She was breathless with excitement, and because she was rather plump and had been running very fast, down a great many corridors. "Oh, oh, 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 your Majesty!" gasped the lady-in-waiting, panting like a goldfish out of water. "Oh, oh, 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 your Majesty!" "Good gracious!" exclaimed the king, dropping his spectacles into the butter. "Is the place on fire?" But the lady-in-waiting merely burst into tears and handed the princess's letter to the queen. It was a very short letter, and this is what it said. "Dear everyone, I think this dragon idea is simply silly, and I won't be shut up in a tower, and once more, I won't marry any stupid dragon-slaying prince. In fact, I've decided that I don't think I'll marry anyone ever, and so I've run away, and it's no use to try to find me, but please don't worry, because I shall be quite all right. Love and kisses, Amy." There were several spelling mistakes. The queen read it, and when she came to the end, she screamed even louder than the two ladies-in-waiting put together and went off into a fit of hysterics. The king knocked over the coffee pot and spilled a new jar of marmalade in his agitation, and search parties were rushed off in every direction with orders to find the princess and bring her back immediately. But nobody so much as even saw a flicker of her skirt. The ordinary princess had vanished completely, as though she had been made of snow and had melted away in the sunshine. The king fined all of his counselors a half-month's salary to relieve his feelings, and the minister in charge of hiring a suitable dragon had to write and cancel his order for a dragon, laying the waste the land for the use of. And that is the end of part 2. Good night. Hope you guys had a good day. Love ya.